Live from the Clarity from Chaos studios, heard worldwide, it's Dave Campbell. On every episode, Dave and his guests explore, discuss, and work on solutions to some of life's biggest challenges. So, if you're ready, be prepared to be enlightened, amused, and even shocked by what you hear. And now, the real, the authentic, the one and only Dave Campbell.
Hi, I'm Dave Campbell, and welcome to another episode of Clarity from Chaos. On this edition, we're going to be discussing an issue that got into the legal system from a trial standpoint in 2018, but it shows another instance of the weaponization of our legal system by federal prosecutors in the DOJ. This particular thing we're going to be talking about, though, tonight has been kept under the radar by the corporate media. The original case, the larger case, was known as the Varsity Blues scandal. You might remember it as a bribery case where influential people were paying off an individual to bribe prestigious college administrators to allow their kids to get into schools they may not have normally gotten into. We are incredibly pleased, to welcome the author of the best-selling book, Varsity Blues, The Scandal Within the Scandal, John Wilson. Born into poverty, John was raised by an unstable mother living in Bowles Park in Connecticut. He handpicked cotton from the age of 12 to 16 to help the family make ends meet, and then was adopted by an Air Force sergeant, and his whole life changed. He went on to earn a BS in chemical engineering, graduated with an MBA from Harvard, and at 29 became the youngest partner in Bain & Company's history. Welcome to the show, Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Dave. It's good to be here.
So, back in 2011, our FBI, and I think in 2011, if I'm not mistaken, Mueller was running the FBI at that point. I can't remember that far back, but I believe he was, because I think he was the predecessor to Comey, if I'm not mistaken. But they started this whole investigation, and they rounded up 33 parents that participated in this scheme. Some of the notables, obviously, was Felicity Huffman and Lori Loughlin. But unfortunately, your family got caught up in this whole debacle as well, correct?
Yes, it was actually in 2018 that the investigation began, and then it went public in 2019. So it's been over 7 years now. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, for some reason I was thinking it had gone back earlier than that.
It did when I was introduced to Singer. So I was first introduced to Singer back in that time frame.
Oh, okay.
So that's when it started for me with Singer. But the actual federal investigation began in 2018.
So, that begs the question, how in the world did you get caught up in something like this by not having anything to do with it?
Well, the only common link for me and the other people was that we had hired Rick Singer. Rick Singer, he's the confessed con man at the center of this scandal. He had 3,000 parent clients. And the Boston prosecutors, when they had a random tip unrelated to me from a fellow in Connecticut, said, there's this guy, Rick Singer, who is doing all kinds of illicit things with parents and college coaches. They began to pull on that thread, and they found that there were some very big names, celebrities on the West Coast involved in the scandal. They knew at that point there could be very big media attention, and the media spotlights are something that can catapult a prosecutor's career. So they saw the media spotlight potential. They saw that Rick Singer had thousands of clients. They were all primarily in California, as was his company, as was the schools involved, Stanford, USC, and so forth. And they wanted to have the case come to Boston so they could keep it and get the media attention for their own careers. There was only one problem. He only had one client out of his 3,000 based in Massachusetts. That was me. And while those, let's say 1% of Singer's clients were doing bad things, they were cheating on tests, they were bribing coaches.
Right.
So Singer had 1% of his clients that were bad, and they were in large part confessed to these crimes. They were all on the West Coast. So the prosecutors needed to do two things. They needed to say there was a conspiracy amongst all the parents, which there wasn't. That got overturned. And then they had at least one co-conspirator based in Massachusetts. And I was the only choice. So it didn't matter whether my facts were different than other people's facts. It didn't matter if I was innocent. They needed to charge me to bring this case to Boston so the media and the attention for their
Yeah,
careers
so they had a
could be
bigger
in Boston.
bigger media market.
Well, no, just for their own career, frankly, because
Okay,
if it
okay.
if it didn't come to Boston, they would have gone to federal prosecutors in LA. And that would
Oh,
have the Boston prosecutors would have lost the case to their LA counterparts.
okay. So let me take a step back. You were introduced to Singer. In what capacity? I mean, obviously this was before you found out that Singer was, dealing under the table and all the other kinds of things. So what had you been introduced to Singer? I mean, what was he supposedly doing with all of these other thousands of clients?
He had a
Just
legitimate business. So Singer
oh, okay,
had a legitimate business, and one of his colleagues who worked with him for 40 years said he had two sides to his business. He had the dark side, which is about 1%, and he had the wholesome side accounts. And he had legitimate services. He had real tutors. He hired a fleet of tutors that would help.
oh, okay,
He
okay,
had real people to help tutor my son and my daughters on things like practicing for the SAT. He had real charity work that he did. My son, I would drive my son to Sacramento to do real community service with inner city kids. He had real knowledge as well of all the different colleges and high schools. So Singer came to me in 2010 from Goldman Sachs. I worked with Goldman Sachs for 10 years as an advisor. And my Goldman Sachs advisor said, "Hey, now your son is entering high school. There's a great resource we have. He's done a lot of work with a number of Goldman Sachs clients, and he's got the biggest business on the West Coast, helping to advise families, provide tutoring services, and advise families on what's the best fit for
okay,
their son or daughter for college." So he had a legitimate reputation. He had many high reputation clients. He had people like Steve Jobs, Joe Montana as clients. And when Goldman Sachs recommends someone and says he's got, everybody who's at
right,
anybody on the West Coast, you trust him. And he did
yeah,
legitimate work for us. For 10 years, he did legitimate work. We never had any reason to doubt him. When he talked about schools, what impressed me most is my son played water polo at the national level. He played with the Stanford Club. He knew every club and every high school water polo team in America that was in the top 20. So Singer had this encyclopedia of knowledge. He also knew the top colleges in water polo. So when he was talking, the credibility he had with us was, at a 10, because he knew Modern Day and all these other schools that my son had competed against in water polo. And it's
right.
such an unusual sport. He said, "God, this guy's got to be the real deal." He knows his water polo schools all over the country.
So how in the hell does a man that offers legitimate tutoring services to his client, how does that client then get caught up in some kind of bribery scheme?
Well, I think what happened again, 1% of his clients had students or children that weren't qualified. Right.
Right.
So
Okay.
if you are looking to get into a top school and your child isn't qualified academically or athletically, he then came up with this pathway. He had three pathways that people got into college. He said you had the front door, the normal application, you had the back door where you donate a building and you can get lifetime VIP status for your whole family and your grandchildren. Or he had something he called the side door. He said they're all legitimate, which was you make a one-time donation for $100,000 or $250,000, and you got a one-time boost for a qualified child. So that worked for many people who are highly qualified. If you had a qualified child, the schools would say, you make a donation or donation commitment for
Right.
$100,000, we'll give your child a second look, a tiebreaker boost in admissions. So Singer took that approach, but then some people who had unqualified kids who were desperate to get their children into top schools were willing to, bend the were
Okay.
willing to cut corners. And that's where he came up with schemes like he paid people to take their children's tests for them or to correct their tests for them. And so some people who are desperate to get their kids into school, this is what you hear in the media that was so sensational in this case. Some parents paid him to cheat on tests. And then some other parents paid him to bribe coaches. And he was actually bribing people with cash to the coach, not to the school. We didn't do that. My daughters had a perfect score without cheating and a 99 percentile score on their ACTs. My son had a 93 percentile. We didn't bribe anybody. Our money went to the school, and we got a donation receipt from the school. We gave the
Right.
money to Singer. He said he was the United Way of college donations. You give to him, and then he'll donate to the school. You get a receipt, but the school won't have your name directly. They'll have it indirectly, and only get it as a memo item for the receipt, so they don't keep hounding you for more donations. So there was a handful of parents who were corrupt, who were willing to cheat, who were willing to bribe, and so forth. But that was 1%
Right.
of Singer's clients. We weren't like that. But 1% of his clients were willing to do whatever it took, and Singer was more than willing for a fee, I guess, to pay people to cheat on tests and so
Well,
forth.
okay. All right. So you drew the short straw, obviously, because you live in Massachusetts. How, how does any of that work? I'm going to fast forward a little bit because you won your case on appeal, right?
Yes, we lost at
in
the trial and we won on appeal.
yeah. So they put you through all of this BS just so that they could put on their dog and pony show in Boston then.
Yes, the Boston prosecutors, the ones who were based in Boston, needed the case to come to Boston for their careers. Otherwise, it would have gone to their colleagues in LA. So they needed to charge me, even though my facts were completely different than the others.
Yeah. So I guess that begs the question, John, where's the accountability in this BS?
It's horrific, and I can tell you the abuse they put me through in this process and my family.
Oh, I can imagine. I can't imagine. Just it, having seen, and I was going to ask you, having seen what they did to Trump or tried to do to Trump, and I can't even imagine the amount of money he spent on attorneys to fight the abuse, and then replicate that on you to have to fight that same kind of abuse. To me, it's just unconscionable that they would do something like that.
They have unlimited resources and
Right.
they can just bury you. It took my entire life savings. Again, I grew up in poverty, as you said. I didn't pick cotton, actually, I picked tobacco, but same thing. And, it took every dime dollar I've ever earned in my life to fight these guys. But in my mind, it's worth it to defend my family's honor. But I got to tell you, the hardball tactics they use from day one throughout this process are so extreme. It's in my book, but I'll give you one example. Just day one. I'd never been arrested in my life, never charged with a crime in my life. And I tried to live by the rules and work hard and play hard. I got off an airplane going to a client in Houston, and two FBI agents arrest me getting off the plane and tell me I'm under arrest, handcuff me for honest services fraud. I was shocked. And I said, "What is that?" I was even more shocked at their reply. They said, "We don't know. We've never heard of it before." I said, "What? How can you charge with a crime you've never even heard of?" They said, "It's such an unusual crime. We've never heard of it before, but it's some kind of fraud." Then they proceeded to not only book me, do all the DNA and photos and everything else and fingerprints, they then brought me to a federal prison. They didn't let me go and go to a judge for a hearing. I was dropped off at a federal prison in Texas, an 850 person prison. They hand me off to the guards there. I'm now shackled. I've got leg irons and handcuffs. They then bring me to the prison. Prison guards there strip me down. Two guards hose me down with power hoses in a big shower room, naked, like an animal. And then they give me a jumpsuit. And before they put me in the common cell block, my cell block had about 60 or 80 prisoners in it. Like you see in the movies, a two-story cell block. One of the guards feels, I think, a bit of empathy for me. I said, "Look, I don't even know why I'm here. I don't even know what I was charged with." They couldn't believe that. And they said, "Something's wrong." And I said, "I don't know why I'm here." And the guy said to me, "You better watch your back in there, son." He says, "You're the only old white guy in this prison or in this cell block. They're all going to assume you're a pedophile. And they hate pedophiles in here. And someone's likely to try to stab you. So watch your back." I spent the next 2 days in a prison worried about being stabbed in the back. And I had no idea why I was even there. I didn't know what the charges were. That was just day one. And the things they did after that got worse and worse and worse. They pressured me to try to plead guilty by adding on 9 charges. They charged me with 180 years of prison time for making a donation to colleges for kids who didn't cheat. And our money went to the school and they gave us the receipt. They called it bribery. And that's just how they destroyed my family and my own reputation. And even after we won, though, where do you go now to get your reputations back, right?
Yeah,
Where do you
exactly.
know, as our children, where do they go to get their reputations back?
Right. Now, was this Rosen and Lelling that did
Yes.
this?
It was Rosen and Lelling that were the lead prosecutor and the number 2 in
Right.
the office at the time.
And no apology, obviously. No retraction. No. Oh, by the way, folks, we effed up this thing. We're terribly sorry.
No, they're still adamant that, I'm guilty and I got off, their view is I got off on some technicalities. I did not. The harsh truth is they knew I was innocent. And we know that because they blocked all of my evidence at my trial. The other thing they can do at this, and we'll go through some of that in a little bit of detail because it's shocking to your audience. They
Right.
judge shop for a judge. Not only do they use me to get venue in Boston for their own careers, then within Boston, they judge shop for a very favorable judge. He's actually the oldest full-time judge in America, federal judge. He's 87 years old now. He just went on senior status, but he wasn't senior status when our trials took place. They sprinkled random cases across all the judges in Boston, or most of them, the federal judges. They had a low-level administrator in Singer's organization, some other random coach from, Tennessee or Texas, and some other people from different areas.
Right.
And they covered all the judges. Once they got the judge they wanted, they then amended that judge's docket and said, now we're going to charge all the parents with conspiracy, and we're going to put them all on this judge. So they got a judge who was very supportive. In my trial, that judge blocked my evidence in motion 660 times. Think about that. He blocked all of her evidence 98.3% of the time. So my daughter's perfect score, for example, the ACT, certified by the ACT, was not allowed into my trial. A trial about college admissions and my own daughter's earned score was disallowed as hearsay. And wasn't hearsay. And the appeals court said you disallowed all this. The appeals court said he made bad rulings and it got overturned. But once you're in a trial and they pick a judge who will rubber stamp whatever the prosecutors want, you have to go and get convicted before you have any recourse. You have nothing to do. The judge is the final say in the courtroom. So he went through and blocked that. He blocked my son's certified swim time. That proved he's one of the fastest on the USC team. He blocked all these examples, hundreds of examples of USC giving people boosts in admissions for making a donation. So our entire defense was decimated. I was shocked. My lawyers said they'd never heard of this before. At the end of the trial, he was getting so frustrated with us trying to bring evidence in. And we needed to do that to preserve the record for the appeals court.
Right.
He said, how much more evidence do you have left? We said, I don't know, 60 more pieces of evidence. He said, I'm going to dismiss it all en masse. He said, you don't even know what it is. He said, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to dismiss it all en masse. We need to move on. So he dismissed all my remaining evidence en masse so they could move on just for the sake of expediency. That's how railroading and how one-sided the trial was. And to make matters worse, not only did I not have my defense, they allowed improperly, this was also overturned, the prosecutors to bring in all the evidence from the 30 other parents. It had nothing to do with me. So they polluted the jury pool with evidence after evidence after evidence of other parents who did bad acts. That wasn't me. So they had people on the phone bribing and agreeing on these recorded calls
Right.
with the FBI.
Right.
We're going to bribe the coach. We're going to bribe the coach. We're going to bribe the coach. You hear that over and over. And then in my setup call, all he says, are you okay if we give a check to the coach? I say, yeah, just like we did at USC. We gave a check to the coach. It was made out to USC. You have to give the check to someone. You don't just throw the check in the pool. And so when he says,
Right.
are you okay giving a check to the coach? I'm thinking, yeah, it's a check made out to USC. I did get a receipt for it. There's nothing wrong with that. But when the jury hears bribery, bribery, bribery from all these other parents, and then the setup call with me from the FBI says, are you okay giving a check to the coach? They assume I'm talking about bribing. I wasn't. My facts are so different. And that's the kind of thing they can do by taking your quotes out of context and then smearing you with the bad acts of other people. And they did that over and over and over again in the trial. And then the final nail in the coffin was when the judge defined the jury instructions. He said that a donation to a college can be considered a bribe to the coach if the coach gives you a boost in admissions. That was overturned as well. There's never been a case in history where the victim of a bribe, in this case USC, is the one who gets the money. And now that they get the money, they got to keep it. They've kept it to this day, and they gave me a receipt for it. And I remember there was an appellate brief that said, how can it be that the victim of the bribe gets the money? It can't be bribery. And yet the judge defined it that way. The judge defined it that way explicitly in the jury instructions for the jury. So if I were a juror and I didn't hear any of my evidence and I heard 30 other people's bad acts, and well, I must be like them, and the judge says a donation to a school can be considered a bribe to a coach, then you have no choice but to convict. It was basically a directed verdict in a kangaroo court. And it took losing and then going to the appeal to get justice and to get this stuff cleared up. But it was just a very painful journey for over now 6 years.
Yeah, but you didn't get financial
Remuneration or compensation.
Yeah, you didn't get your money spent to defend yourself back.
No,
Rosen and Lelling, and apparently this judge, just like the judge with Trump, where they overturned that civil case with James. He had money to spend. You didn't have money to spend, and so
it destroyed me. And even just getting arrested, you lose your job too. I lost all my corporate jobs, my consulting, my board roles. As soon as you're arrested, the government, here's another interesting statistic. The federal government wins 99.6% of the time. Think about that. How could it be a fair system when you have an adversarial system like we have in our federal court system, that they win 99.6% of the time. It's just outrageous. They have every advantage. They have unlimited resources, so 95% of the people plead guilty. And then the
Right.
remaining 5%, they lose those 95% of the time too, because all the rules are tilted in the government's favor. And they can handpick a judge, they can handpick a venue, and they can railroad you through a process. How can it be a fair system when 99.6% of the time they win? Right. So I knew those odds going in, but I still couldn't confess to a crime I didn't commit. And I couldn't confess because that would reinforce the false narrative they were spinning about my children being unqualified. Because if you confess, you say you had to bribe because your kids weren't qualified.
Right.
Well, no,
Right.
my kids were qualified. So I couldn't damn them to a lifetime of public ridicule because their father said they weren't qualified. And that's why he had to bribe. I didn't bribe. They were qualified. I was giving them a tiebreaker boost. So at schools like Harvard and Stanford and USC, even a qualified kid, there's 20 qualified kids for every spot, you have a 5% chance. If you make a donation, you have a 50% chance or an 80% chance, depending on the school. So that's all I was doing. I was taking my kids who had all the qualifications they needed on their own hard earned merits and giving them a better shot at getting in. Not a guarantee, but a better shot through a donation. And that's something that's going on to this day. It's been going on for generations. It's not illegal. But again, the prosecutors needed to try to twist things and railroad me through a trial just to get the conviction. Because once they charged me, even though it was a false charge, they couldn't admit they were wrong. They couldn't drop the charge because then people say, wait a minute, why is this happening in Boston? Because if there's nobody in Boston, why are 300 people having to fly back and forth between California and Boston? That's what the number was. There were 300 people that had to fly back and forth, 6 hours each way, lawyers, defendants, witnesses, USC people, etc., for this case because the Boston prosecutors wanted it for their career. One other thing, they knew the truth. I also voluntarily, during the middle of this thing, before I saw the Netflix movie come out, I voluntarily took 2 days of polygraph tests with the former head of the FBI polygraph division for years, and then independently reviewed by the former head of the CIA polygraph program worldwide, the two best people in the world to do polygraphs. The guy at the CIA, he ran the polygraph school for the entire federal government in South Carolina for 10 years. So there's nothing better. I passed all of those tests with flying colors. I submitted that in a court filing against Netflix and I gave it to the government. The government knew I passed all these polygraph tests. The government itself uses 50,000 polygraphs a year. They believe in polygraphs. They're not allowed into court in a federal court unless both sides agree. And of course, they wouldn't agree. And they said to the judge at the sentencing, when I did introduce the polygraph, I said, well, these are just self-serving polygraph results. Well, yeah, they're self-serving. They tell the truth because I'm innocent. And they dismissed it as being self-serving. The
Oh my
polygraph results
goodness.
are self-serving, so we're not going to let them in.
On a personal note, John, how can you keep from being just riddled with so much anger about this whole thing? Excuse me. I mean, if this had happened to me, I'd be vibrating with anger over this. I admire your calm demeanor about it. It's just unconscionable, some of the crap. And then I was gonna ask you about here recently, the whistleblower for the DOJ got vindicated. And then Patel found all those burn bags full of crap in the quote secret room. And it just goes on. And I don't know, to be honest with you, I don't know if it's ever been fair. It brings into question all of it. Because if you go back and look at J. Edgar Hoover in the FBI and all of his little 3x5 cards that he used to blackmail people with,
Excuse me.
I don't know that it has ever been right,
I think the system has been unfair for quite some time. It's gotten more skewed over time. I
Yeah,
think technology, I think the ability for prosecutors to weaponize our system of justice has gotten much worse, and the level of abuse has gotten much worse. In terms of your question about how I keep a level of composure in this, I guess I look at the future more than I look at the present. I grew up in a very difficult set of circumstances, like a lot of your listeners probably. Not only grew up in poverty, but I didn't even know who my father is. Never had a father until I was
right.
adopted. And, you know, I've grown up in the school of hard knocks, so I've seen a lot of difficult things, lived through a lot of difficult things. So for me, in some ways, I still feel blessed. I escaped poverty and was able to earn a good livelihood and be successful and provide for my family, beyond my wildest dreams. And so, in many ways, I'm fortunate because I had the resources and the grit to fight. Most people don't have that. I would be
Right.
bitter if I were sitting in prison now for 180 years because I didn't have the resources and I didn't have the grit to fight. Then I'd probably be bitter. But I'm still blessed. I had the resources, I have the grit, and I have the support of my family and friends to fight these guys. And I won. I'm the one out of 10,000 that wins. And so, in many ways, as bad as this has been, and it's been a 7-year nightmare, I'm still pretty lucky. So I look at the bright side of things. I tend to be
Yeah.
a glass half full kind of guy. And what I want to do is do what I can to help make sure this doesn't happen to other people. I'll never make sure the system is foolproof, but I think by speaking out, I can do my fair share to help make sure this doesn't happen, or at least reduce the frequency of this happening to other people by calling attention to what they did and the abuses here. So I look at that as a more noble mission. I'm on a mission to do things in the rest of my life is to one, correct the record, to clear my kids' names and to help give them a future that they deserve, and to try to
Right.
correct the record and fix the system to the extent I can, so this doesn't happen as frequently in the future as it has in the past. And with those two missions for the last part of my life, that keeps me more than busy and keeps me optimistic. Again, I don't think everybody in government's corrupt. I haven't been jaded that much. I still think most people in government are hardworking, decent people. I really do believe that. But I do think there are a lot of bad apples, and it doesn't take many bad apples in a prosecutor office to really destroy lives. They have unbelievable power. You know the old saying about power corrupting. Prosecutors have the
Right.
closest thing to unlimited power and absolute power that there is. And if they can handpick a judge, their only check and balance on a prosecutor is a judge. And if the judge is in their pocket, is going to give them approval for everything they want to
Well,
do, then they have unlimited power. They become petty tyrants and they can do whatever they want. That's the combination of power with no check and balance that I think is got to stop in America. Because if you can handpick a judge in a venue and you've got a prosecutor with malevolent intent, that combination can destroy lives and destroy reputations in an unfair way.
yeah, and not only in your case, but we saw it on parade with Trump, Letitia
Yeah,
James, and
exactly.
and
The
the
same kind
and
of
the
thing.
and the judge that she had handpicked that had no business, couldn't even do a proper real estate appraisal, and again on appeal, they both got it broken over their heads. And now she's facing mortgage fraud. So one can only hope that quote, karma's a bitch, and she's gonna find out the other end of the spectrum. So do you think it's ever going to get fixed or even come
I do
close to
think there's
getting
a chance
fixed?
at it. I do think there's a chance at it now. I think that Trump is so radical in his approach, and I think the people he's brought in from Pam Bondi to Cash Patel and so forth,
Right.
Dan Bongino, they're willing to shake things up. And I've actually met with some of the junior people in the DOJ, and they're interested in my case. They're interested in the
I was gonna
anti-weaponization. They're interested in pursuing things that are going to help correct the record and help fix things. So I think there's a genuine interest in taking a fresh look at what could change. And I've got several recommendations, for that. For
right.
example, the judge shopping. I've been through this experience. I'm not a lawyer, but I've had a lot of business experience. I've run businesses, I've run large organizations, and there's three recommendations I had for them, and one related to colleges I had for them, and they were very impressed and want to pursue that. One of those, for example, was judge shopping. In California, they've had the ability, anyone has the ability in California in state court to have a redo, if you will. Right? Immediately when your judge is assigned, all the judges are supposed to be assigned randomly, and they were in Massachusetts too. When you have the judge assignment, you can ask for something called papering the judge. You can ask for a new judge for no reason whatsoever. You just don't like whatever, the way they look.
Right.
So
Yeah.
you get an automatic redraw. You go back into the wheel, they spin, and they get another judge. That process has worked very well in California since the early 1950s. And so it works at scale, works beautifully, and it really helps prevent judge shopping. The federal level doesn't have that system. It's been tried or it's been suggested in the past, and a lot of the people, prosecutors who run the system, say, no, we don't need that. We don't want that. Well,
Right.
I do think that's the kind of thing that could be implemented now under this, under the Trump administration. Why not give federal defendants the chance to ask for a new judge? That would help prevent some of this judge shopping. And again,
Right.
it's no harm, no foul. Just ask for a new judge, And right in the beginning, you only have a certain period of time to do that, and you get another random draw. That's a major change. That's one. A second one I'll share, which has also in this case been devastating to me, is I don't know if you know this, but none of the FBI or prosecutor meetings are ever recorded with witnesses. They don't record them on purpose. So the FBI agents never have a recording device with them or that they use. They take notes, and they often take their notes months after the fact. They write down their notes.
So
Well,
these 302, what is it? The
the 302
302
reports, right?
Yeah, they're not recorded.
They're not recorded. They're only by
They're
their own memory.
their own memory, and they're handwritten.
And they write them in a way that's going to support their case.
Exactly.
Right. So they can
Exactly. And
distort
there's
the
nobody
truth.
there. There's nobody there to corroborate what the hell was done.
Right. In fact, if you have a meeting with the FBI, you bring your lawyer and you say, I want to record this. They'll say, no, your meeting is over. They won't let you do that. Right. So I think, much like the George Floyd and other things have caused body cameras for, let's say, street cops, the
Right.
equivalent for white collar crime is to require every interview by an FBI agent or a prosecutor to be recorded. Complete
Right.
transparency. What is wrong with that? And that's been resisted again and again as well by a number of people within the DOJ. But I think this administration was willing to take a hard look at something like that. So if you recorded every interview, it would make an enormous difference on transparency and what was really said versus the FBI slanting and twisting things. So, for example, in my case, there was a call, one of the most important calls in my case, the very first call with Singer when he began cooperating. It lasted 34 minutes. It was made from the FBI's own offices. There were 6 FBI agents and prosecutors in the room. They all said they left the room just before the call started and they came back after it was over. They didn't record it. It was an extremely important and helpful call to me. I remember it explicitly. My wife was on the call. My daughters were on the call. It was a FaceTime call, and they say I wasn't on it. And they said there was no need to record it because I wasn't on it. That's not true, but they let him have this call with me, and they didn't record it. And it would have cleared my name immediately because of things we talked about on that call. I think they probably recorded it and they just destroyed the call because it was too helpful.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
But you know what they wrote in the news about that? 2 months later, they wrote a 302. It was seven words. Good first call with the Wilson daughters. That was the whole report. Good first call with the Wilson daughters.
Oh my
And
God.
so that's it. And then the entire case, I had 11 calls, I think, and like dozens of texts and emails to Singer. The number of 302 page, when I talked to the FBI about this, the former FBI people, they said there should have been dozens and dozens, not 100 pages in your case. All they had were 7 lines, not even a quarter of one page from all of the interviews with Singer, all the debriefs with Singer, all the calls preparing for my calls. 7 lines. And they're all things like good first call. Not sure if the dad knew of the inaccuracies. That's all they would say on these things because they didn't want to write any. They said in the trial, they didn't write anything down that was exculpatory. Well, if that's what they testified to, then damn, that's how they get away with sharing. Why not have these things recorded? Because there were a lot of exculpatory things that were stated, and they said we didn't write anything down that was exculpatory.
Oh my God.
And they were able to get away with that. And the judge just said, okay, that's fine. That's called Brady material. Whether you wrote it down or not, you're supposed to disclose it. But if you have unethical people, they don't have to. They don't write it down. They don't have to disclose it. They don't have to write it. They don't write it down. They don't have to disclose it. So that's the second thing, is to force the FBI and all their interviews to record them. Everybody has a cell phone with them. Just press the record button.
Right.
It's not like you have to invest billions to do this. You could do this tomorrow with everybody in the building. Press the record button for every interview. What's wrong with that? If transparency is the best remedy for corruption, and it's the best disinfectant, sunshine.
Right.
Force every interview to be recorded. I think it'd be a normal reaction to the kind of abuse that's been going on in the system. Those 2 things alone would make a huge difference, I think, in the criminal justice system to level the playing field a bit more.
Oh my. Patel, I'm just having a thought that Kash Patel's got one hell of a job trying to clean up some of this mess.
Yeah, it's pretty bad what they can do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, it's not everybody. The problem is it's not everybody. I think there are a lot of good people. And so there's a few bad apples. How do you sort them out? And then how do you get them out of the system?
Yeah, exactly. And, and they're obviously judge shopping on getting injunctions and everything else. And the other thing is, this leads credence to the impeaching federal judges, i.e. the judge that they judge shopped. With this kind of information coming out on what he did, I mean he destroyed a family by his incompetence. there has to be some kind of retribution to that. There has to be some kind
Yeah.
of reckoning that
Yeah.
that this guy did that. The same
Right.
with, it's just
You
a
would hope,
shame.
but it's not.
Yeah,
He's never going to be impeached. He's 87 years old now. They're going to let him
right,
retire, and so
right.
there's no recourse, right? And I think
Yeah.
there's a reason why they protect the judges, and I get it because you don't want to have judges fearful that they're going to be sued or impeached if they make a bad
Well,
decision. But when there's the level of bias that was shown in my case, at one point in my trial, he also said we were shocked by this. The prosecutor didn't object to one of our motions, and the judge said, "Aren't you going to object to that?" The judge prompted the prosecutor to say, "Aren't you going to object to that?" Yeah, you're right, Your Honor. We're objecting. That's how favored the
yeah,
prosecutor was in the judge's eyes. He asked them, "Aren't you going to object to that?" What kind
yeah,
of? He's supposed to be
yeah,
calling balls and strikes. He's supposed to be a fair umpire, right?
yeah,
He's asked,
exactly.
"Aren't you going to object to that?"
Yeah, exactly. Oh, that's amazing. So, where can people find the book?
The book is available at any online bookstore. You can even go into bookstores and order it online, but Amazon is probably the easiest place to get the book. It's been an
Right,
Amazon bestseller for a number of weeks, which is great, in the true crime category. And all the proceeds of the book, your audience should know, go 100% to charity. 3 different charities. One of the most significant is a charity for legal defense for people who can't afford to defend themselves. We want to
right.
do whatever we can to help make sure that those who are falsely accused have some resources to fight, because I'm not the first time this has happened. Unfortunately, I won't be the last time this has happened.
No, yeah,
And, I think the legal system is so overwhelming for most people that they need help financially. And the public
yeah,
prosecutors or public defenders that they give you are drop in the bucket compared to the budgets for public, prosecutors. And so
right.
we want to do what we can to help make a difference, not only with getting our story out there, but also in terms of the charities that we're donating to.
So, do you have a website people could go to get information as well,
Yes, we also
John?
do have a website. It's called thescandalwithinthescandal.com. And there you can get updates, because we're also taking on actions now against Netflix. We have a lawsuit with Netflix and against USC for defrauding us. And so we're proceeding with both of those still. Netflix, we've got to go to appeals court. I'm sorry. Now, Netflix, we won the Superior Court first motion to dismiss. We're in discovery. That'll probably take us another year or so. So we made good progress there. We won the first big hurdle. On the USC thing, we lost the first battle. We're going to go to appeal on that, though, which is they had a motion basically for summary judgment, or not summary, for to dismiss. And we're on the grounds of we missed the statute of limitations, technical grounds, but we're appealing that, and we're going to continue to pursue that as well. We want to hold these large institutions accountable. It's not just the federal
Right.
government that abused us, but Netflix abused us, and as well as USC in this process. And so we want to get these institutions in the spotlight. We want to hold them accountable as well for what they did.
Wow. Well, we've been talking to Mr. John Wilson, who's the author of Varsity Blues, The Scandal Within the Scandal. And John, it's been an absolute eye-opener, and I hope the audience goes out and grabs the book and starts to arm themselves, because as you said, you're not the first, and you're certainly not going to be the last that gets thrown under the bus with the federal bureaucracy on some of this stuff.
Yeah. It's more than a
So,
bureaucracy. It's almost a weaponized piece of machinery that
yeah,
these prosecutors use right now. And we've seen how they can go after political people for political reasons. They can go
right,
after citizens like you and me if it gives them a career boost or some other motivation. So you don't even have to be a political person. I'm not a political person. They can
right.
come after you for any reason if it suits their
Yeah,
agenda.
exactly. Well, thank you for taking the time, John, to go through this. And again, I admire your composure around all of this. And I would agree that you're blessed. I think we're all blessed, but still, I just have to wonder about trying to hold down the anger for some of this stuff when there's really no accountability in sight, So,
Yeah. Well, I'm still focusing on the future for my children more than anything else. I'm not a
right.
very vindictive kind of person, but I'll channel my energy into a more positive
There you go.
venue for my kids. Yeah.
There you go. Well, thanks again, John. I really appreciate your time. All right.
Thank you for listening. If you would like to listen to more Clarity from Chaos shows on demand, go to clarityfromchaos.buzzsprout.com or send Dave an email at info@clarityfromchaos.com for information on previous shows. You can also listen to the show on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Twitter, or Google Podcast. Until next time, please remember, it's not about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about learning to dance in the rain. Be well, everyone.